My name is Genneca Hauser, and I'm back with another interview on behalf of the CrudeLife.com. And today we get to talk with Charlie Riedl, and he is the executive director for the Center for Liquefied Natural Gas. Am I correct, Charlie? That's your actual job title, yes?
That's correct.
I know you do quite a lot. Would you be interested in telling everyone a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure, happy to. So the Center for LNG is a trade association that is based in Washington, D.C., and we represent companies that are involved in the export of liquefied natural gas, which is really just natural gas cooled to minus 260 degrees, and loaded onto cargo vessels and transported around the world to regions and countries and places where natural gas demand is short, or I should say, natural gas supply is short, but demand is high. And so I've been at this for the last almost 6 years now, representing 12 companies, and uh, every one of the current facilities that is currently exporting LNG out of the United States. So busy job with lots to do between working on Capitol Hill and with the administrations, and also with some of the on the receiving end of where this LNG is being shipped to as well.
Nice. Well, I can't imagine that would be a terribly easy job, I suppose, especially over a lot of the different things that have happened in the last year. What was it, about 10, 11 months ago? Ten months ago is when the China trade agreement was brought forth, right?
Yeah, so that's right. I mean, we've had a ongoing trade dispute with China for the last almost 3 years now, and it has really slowed the LNG supply or exports from the United States to China quite considerably. And what we really saw happen was a trade dispute that was started over things that had nothing to do with natural gas or the trade of natural gas between the United States and China. And as the various levers were pulled between the two governments and two countries to try to uh, really bring China to the table in a good faith negotiation effort, what we ultimately saw was an escalation of tariffs being levied against various U.S. and Chinese products. And natural gas was one of the very last tariffs that the Chinese levied against the United States. And what it really basically did was essentially close down trade of LNG between the U.S. and China. We've started to see a little bit of an uptick in exports go back to China as it relates to LNG, but really rather slow. And I don't think that the Chinese are going to come anywhere close to hitting the phase one trade agreement that was struck between the U.S. and China, like you mentioned, almost 11 months ago now. I know I'm hard pressed to sort of see how they're going to meet what they set forth in that phase one portion of the trade agreement.
Out of curiosity, how far off are they from what they had agreed to? Do you know?
Well, they agreed to buy $200 million worth of products from the United States. I don't think they're anywhere near that number at this point. The number really will depend upon sort of where we see cargoes going. But to give you a sense, I think we've sent something in 2017. We sent something like 50 plus cargoes to China. In 2019, I think we sent eight, and so far this year, I think we've sent six. So, really, a rather significant impact on the trade agreement, or as a result of the trade agreement.
Well, I can only imagine. Have things been picking up elsewhere around the globe since then, or has this really kind of damaged a lot of what has been what normally would have been exported, I suppose?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is it has what has happened, right, is the LNG that is already being produced in the United States. Like I mentioned, there are six facilities in the lower 48 that are producing LNG, mostly in the Gulf Coast region. But those facilities have been sending their LNG to other areas around the world. A lot of that gas that was probably or would have been bound for China has been headed to Europe. So we have seen as we're recovering from the pandemic and we start to see some of these other countries who are maybe a bit further along in their recovery from the pandemic versus the United States, we're starting to see demand tick back up. And we've actually been hitting, as far as feed gas goes, into these facilities, some of the highest numbers, actually the highest numbers that we've seen since we started exporting gas in 2016. So, we're seeing other markets absorb the LNG that would have probably been bound for China had it not been for the trade dispute. So we are okay. Where we're feeling the impact as an industry as it relates to China are these projects that have been fully sanctioned by the U.S. government, right? So they have all the necessary permits, they have all their design plans in place, and it's important to sort of understand and put that into context, because when we talk about an LNG facility, they're roughly $10 to $20 billion in construction costs, right? So there's a facility in Maryland that is operated. It's called the Cove Point LNG facility. It is the single largest private sector construction job in the state, in the history of the state of Maryland. So when you think about these projects, they're order of magnitude in the multi-billion dollars, and they take about 4 or 5 years to build. And so when you have a project that's fully permitted and ready to go, and you have a market like China where their demand is growing, and we're not seeing purchase agreements met or agreed upon, it really slows the construction or the possibility to build out more of these LNG facilities. And so you really can't build a $15 billion facility with the Field of Dreams mentality that if you build it, they will come, right? You need that facility to be underpinned by customer contract agreements. So you could take that to a financial institution and say, look, I've got, for the next 20 years, a customer lined up who is going to ultimately pay this $20 billion construction cost back. And so we've got a number of projects that are basically shovel ready and ready to get started, but they're looking for the customers, right? And we saw the pandemic really sort of slow that process down as well. So between China and the pandemic, 2020 was almost a bit of a lost year for the LNG industry as we're thinking about new commercial build out of facilities.
That's unfortunate. I guess since you had brought it up, how did the COVID pandemic change the way things were being done in regards to, the LNG process?
Yeah, so really we didn't see from an operational standpoint, right? We didn't really see any fundamental changes. What we saw though was a slowdown in the demand for natural gas globally, right? Whether it be because we just saw factories shuttered or slowed where production was limited, people staying at home. So really the idea was not necessarily in regards to the facilities that were up and running, right? They were able to produce LNG as needed. But the as needed portion of it is really the part of it that was impacted significantly. We just, and you look to Asia, South Korea, some of these markets where there's large amounts of manufacturing, of technology, or a heavy reliance on natural gas for their manufacturing, that just basically slowed to almost a halt. And as a result, right, what happened was demand for LNG plummeted, and we saw this big dip, just like basically every other commodity that happened when we saw sort of the worldwide lockdown that happened. We're starting to see a slow recovery here. And really, I expect that as we round into the beginning of next year, towards the end of the first quarter, we'll continue to see sort of these consistent high numbers and the demand sort of back to where it was pre-pandemic levels.
And that's interesting to know because I had seen on one of the links that was sent to me, it was talking about how the projection for throughout this winter was looking like the demand was going to go up, but the production was going to actually decrease. Do you think that that's still on par?
Mm-hmm. I do. I think that we'll continue to see that kind of growth, right? And when we think about that, really, it sort of takes a step away from the LNG production side of this and more towards where we're at from in the U.S. as far as natural gas production, right? And we have record amounts of gas on hand and in storage, and the drawdown of the gas against that natural gas storage will be an interesting one to sort of follow. A lot of that here in the U.S. depends upon weather patterns and really what happens. How high are people turning the heat up, and what does that demand look like? As I look out my window right now, it's snowing, which is usually a good sign for natural gas demand in the winter. So it's one of those things that we will continue to see and pay close attention to as demand for LNG globally recovers. How far will that dip into U.S. gas storage?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I suppose now you've got a whole new set of potential worries to think about with the potential incoming new presidential administration. How do you think things have been affected so far? I mean, even before the inauguration on January 20th, much of the media has already decided, and the Electoral College, of course, had voted placing Biden as president-elect. How do you think this is going to affect the export of LNG?
Yeah, I think it's a bit too early to tell, but I would sort of hazard a couple of guesses here that I would offer. One is, so I think from an LNG perspective, an important nuance to understand is all of the facilities that are currently in operation were approved under the Obama administration. And I would expect that, knowing sort of having been around during the Obama administration and working in the LNG space and seeing what's happened over the last 4 years with the Trump administration, I would expect, Vice President Biden, when he was in the Obama administration, was really out in front of a lot of foreign relations and involved in a lot of those conversations where natural gas was a part or a topic of conversation. And he was quite a proponent of LNG exports and natural gas. I think that we will see more of that. I don't know if it will be as I don't expect it. I guess what I would say is I don't expect it to be as aggressive as it was in the Trump administration, where we saw sort of this full-throated endorsement of natural gas and the use of LNG. But I would expect that we will be able to continue to operate with the same level of confidence that we were under the Obama administration and as we transition into a Biden administration. Interestingly enough, right, we were sort of humming along as an industry when President Trump came in, and then he started a trade dispute with our largest trading partner. So it hasn't been exactly a perfect scenario for the LNG industry. I think that, interestingly enough, maybe counterintuitive to what you might hear from fossil fuel industry executive is I do think that if the United States re-enters the Paris Climate Agreement, it's actually for the benefit of U.S. LNG exporters. When we start to look at this, there are opportunities there from an optics standpoint that help U.S. LNG exporters when it looks like we're participating in things like the Paris Climate Agreement, when we start to see regulations that look like we're addressing methane, some of the challenges that we hear internationally about U.S. gas production. So I actually think that there are some opportunities that exist with the incoming Biden administration. A lot of that remains to be seen, right? We're just starting to see some of the cabinet nominations come through. So I think it's a bit too premature to start hazarding a whole bunch of thoughts on how we expect this to go. But I think that we'll be able to manage and work with a Biden administration as we did with an Obama and a Trump administration. So I think that there's opportunities.
Nice. Do you think that some of your confidence in that area might stem from all the projects that you've got going on in order to reduce the carbon emissions and like the methane trapping? I was really intrigued reading about the different ways and how much carbon has been brought down. The carbon emissions have been brought down.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right, Genneca. I mean, Genneca, I think there's all kinds of opportunities that exist with technology that we're seeing Center for LNG members deploy some of the efforts and initiatives that they've started to address both methane and carbon. And really what we've seen here in the U.S. with the adoption of natural gas, switching from coal to natural gas for electric generation, those kinds of things is really going to provide it's providing a blueprint for others around the world to look at. And what we've seen, actually, the interesting thing, there was a lot of debate about this during the presidential election and during the debates, around sort of bans on fossil fuels and all of these kinds of things. But what we've seen happening with the adoption of natural gas for power generation, what we're seeing is it's spurring this sort of partnership or developing this partnership with renewables. And what we're finding is in areas or regions where we're deploying natural gas as part of the solution, right? Not the entirety of the solution, but part of the solution for power generation, it de-risks some of the developing technology related to renewables. So not only is natural gas a cleaner burning fuel from the alternative that we're switching from, which in most cases is coal, right? We're switching away from a lot of that sort of dirtier fuel source, which is immediately addressing some of the CO2 emissions, right? We're at the lowest level, but our demand is the highest it's ever been. But we're seeing renewables as well start to emerge as a partner with natural gas. And I think that that's sort of the exciting component of where we're headed to next, is this sort of long-term partnership that I expect renewables and natural gas to enjoy as a result of this technology that's emerging on the renewable front and the reliability of natural gas. So I think that those two together are going to be a great example that I will use, and that I would expect the Biden administration will probably use as well on international trips, when we're out talking to foreign governments, when we're out talking about the benefits of natural gas and what that allows some of these more ambitious countries to try to do as they're looking towards a renewable future right now, and addressing some of the CO2 emissions and mitigating that and moving off of some of the dirtier fuels.
Yeah, and I noticed that in a lot of the reports when it comes to carbon and methane emissions, in regards to oil and natural gas, a lot of the dirtiness, I suppose, would be coming from other countries, it seems. And I'm not sure that that's always mentioned or highlighted. So it kind of got me wondering, since we're moving so forward so well, is our technology, is it going to be affordable enough for other countries to emulate, or do you think that's going to take more innovation down the road?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think that the short answer is yes. The technologies that we're deploying are definitely affordable. I think that when you look at some of the emerging countries where demand for gas is growing, India is a great example, right? It's an emerging market and country that is really trying to lift people out of energy poverty, um, where they're using dung, they're using all kinds of sort of alternative fuel sources that are much dirtier, much more harmful for their health, the air, and either to cook with or for electric generation in their homes, right? And maybe not even have electricity, right? They're burning dung for lighting in their homes. So when you talk about that and the ability to deploy natural gas, we've been doing it here for so long, and we've driven so much of the cost out of the technology. When you think about carbon capture, some of the things that we're able to do here that are easily done or we can replicate in other countries should be a no-brainer for some of these other countries that are really trying to emerge. And I think that we would look at like in India as a great example of what they're trying to do to develop natural gas infrastructure, pipeline, all the things necessary for the long-term development of that country. We're starting to see happen right now, and they're able to do it in a cost-conscious way.
Nice. That ought to be very helpful, I'm sure. Well, okay. I wonder, is there anything else that you would like to add when it comes to maybe the recovery or some plans post pandemic or into 2021? What are we looking forward to? Is there anything you'd like to put a highlight on?
Getting on an airplane again would be a good time.
Right.
Not wearing a mask. No, I say that in jest, but in all honesty, right? I mean, I think that we finally are starting to see some positivity as it relates to this vaccine, which I think will really start to really ramp up the pace in which the recovery happens. These markets where we're starting to see natural gas demand recover are all positive signs. I expect that by the end of 2021, we as it relates to gas demand, right? We will see sort of things back to where they were before. And I think that that is something that all of our members are excited about. I think that it's something that we're working hard and making sure that we continue to really deliver the value proposition of natural gas and the importance of U.S. participation in that market, right? I think that that's sort of the other part of this that we're going to continue to really focus our attention on, and making sure that we've got all of the answers for those who are looking at as they emerge from the pandemic. These countries, as they emerge from the pandemic, where they're going to focus their efforts as it relates to climate, and make sure that we're ready to help answer those challenges as an industry.
Just kind of being prepared and leading the way, huh?
That's it. That's it.
Well, it's a great goal, great vision to have in mind, and I'm looking forward to the days of getting on a plane and not wearing a mask too. I mean, it's normalcy is a beautiful idea at this point.
Don't realize how much you miss it until it's gone, right? So,
isn't that the truth of it? Well, thank you so much for your time this morning, Charlie. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today, and talk with me today, and give us some of this information. There's a lot of really great stuff in here, and I do appreciate it. So thank you.
Of course. Yeah, happy to, Genneca. Thanks so much.
All right, my friends, that was Charlie Riedl, the Executive Director for the Center for Liquefied Natural Gas. If you'd like to find out more information, take a look at the show notes for links. And if you liked what you heard, make sure to take a look at the rest of what thecrudelife.com has to offer.